The buzzing noise from the intercom by my bed jarred me awake from my nap. I reached over and pressed the button. "A woman is here to see you, sir." My assistant's voice came through the machine. "I'm occupied right now. Lily, could you ask Sophia to see her for me?" Sophia is my personal assistant and handles most of my visitors these days. Honestly, I wasn't occupied at all. I've become somewhat of a recluse, just catching up on my afternoon rest. Lily knew that, so it was strange for her to interrupt me. "The woman says it's personal and urgent, sir. She insists she can only speak with you." "Damn it. Tell her she needs to make an appointment to speak with you. Let's say, sometime next week. She insists it's urgent, sir, and she's not backing down." "Oh, fine. Show her up to my office in 5 minutes." I got up, splashed some water on my face in the bathroom to wake myself up, and walked through the penthouse to my private office. I looked out at the city below. Damn, I hate this place. I hate everything about it. Hell, I think I hate everyone working in the 10 floors below me, even though they all work for me. Lily entered the office without knocking, as she's done lately since I'm rarely here. I'm just the figurehead now. The only reason I stay in this penthouse is that I have nowhere else to be, nothing else I want to do. The woman Lily was supposed to show me marched past her into the office with an officious manner, but the sudden grandeur seemed to catch her off guard, knocking the wind out of her sails. I could see she wasn't used to, nor comfortable with, such an environment. "Are you Mr. James Carter?" she asked before Lily could formally introduce us. "Are you Mr. James Carter?" she repeated. "That's me. My name is Rachel Brooks, and I'm with Hampton Family Services." I think she expected me to be intimidated by that statement. "And what can I do for you, Miss? Or is it Mrs. Brooks from Hampton Family Services?" "Please call me Rachel. We prefer not to be too formal." I could see the confusion on her face. I wasn't what she had expected, nor were these surroundings. She was clearly used to dealing with people on the other end of the financial spectrum, and she was way out of her depth here with me. "Very well, Rachel. You may call me James. Now, how can I help you?" "Lily, you can leave us, thank you," I said, dismissing my assistant with a nod. She left, giving me a curious look before closing the door. The visitor was quite attractive, and I've dealt with gold diggers who tried all sorts of ways to get to me before. "Mr. Carter James, I am with Social Services in Hampton." "You've mentioned that already. Now, how can I help you?" "There is, where do I start?" she said, glancing around the room. The opulence was clearly unexpected for her. "Look, I've got a case involving 2 children and a mother who attempted suicide. It might be easier if you read this note." It was found beside her. She handed me an envelope. It was more of a letter than a note. I sat back in my chair and opened it. "My dearest James," the first line read, and Dan, I knew immediately who it was from. My memory snapped back 10 years to when my once happy life abruptly ended. As I recall, it was a hellish morning. A water main had burst on Willow Street, causing a massive traffic jam as people tried to navigate around the closed road. I was almost an hour and a half late when I tried to sneak into my office unnoticed. It was the second time that week that my commute had been a nightmare. As I walked into my office, Emily, my secretary, not really mine as she handled 3 or 4 of us, greeted me. "James, where have you been? And why is your phone off?" "Oh, I must have forgotten to charge the thing last night," I thought. That had become a habit lately. Too tired to think straight when I got home in the evenings. "Henry Anderson has been looking for you since 9:50. He's furious about something. You'd better get up there quickly." Great, just what I needed. That pompous little fellow on his high horse ever since his father retired. That prick and his brother think they're God's gift to the industry. I wondered who the little jerk had upset now. "Oh, James, thank God you finally showed up. I've been trying to track you down all morning. You really need to work on your punctuality," Henry Anderson said as I entered his office. "Well, if you hadn't moved the office from Hampton to Seabrook, I wouldn't be stuck in traffic jams every morning and evening." You little jerk, I thought. I wondered why I didn't have the guts to say that to him. We all think these things, don't we? Sorry, Henry. There was a burst water main on Willow Street. Well, I got here on time. Of course you did, you little troublemaker. You've got an expensive condo paid for by the company just a few blocks away, where you stay during the week with that little side piece your wife doesn't know about. Anyway, something's gone wrong with the Carter job. They're late on delivery again. I need you to fly out there and talk some sense into Carter's board. You know, smooth things over. They're threatening to take their contract elsewhere again. If that happens, heads will roll, not just here, but at the plant too. You've charmed Carter before. I'm sure you can do it again. And why aren't you going yourself? I thought. While you're at it, take your brother with you. Between the two of you, you're running this company into the ground. If your old man knew how badly you were messing things up, his head would be turning in his grave. Once again, we think these things, don't we? I wish I could think of a good reason why I wasn't saying them. But then if I did, I'd be out on my back, wouldn't I? I'll give Henry Carter a call. I'm sure he'll come around. We've been doing business with him for years. No, you're flying out there on the 3:35 p.m. flight. Old man Carter has retired, and his nephew, John Carter, is now chairman. Neither David nor I can go. We've got a packed calendar this week. A 3:35 p.m. flight. There's no way I can make it. I have to get home and pack first, and besides, I'm supposed to be taking Lisa to the theater this evening. She's been asking me for months. Well, you'll have to take her some other time. Don't worry, the company will reimburse you for the tickets. The play ends its run on Thursday night. Lisa's been nagging me to take her for weeks, but I've been so busy finalizing the Carter contract, I haven't been getting home until too late to go. I figured with the Carter deal signed and out of the way, I have a few free evenings at least. I know the last night is sold out. Tonight was the only day we could get seats for. If I go to Boston, I won't be back before Friday at the earliest. Lisa's going to lose it. Then she'll have to go with a friend or something. What she? Lisa knows the company needs the Carter work. It's nearly half our revenue. You'd better call her and have her go home and pack your bag for you. You'll never make it home and then back to the airport in time from here. Hurry up. We can't afford for you to miss that flight. Cheeky little troublemaker, I thought as I left his office. I'd started working for William Anderson straight out of college. It had been a small operation when I joined, Carter's Sons Machine Tools. William Anderson had gotten in on the ground floor some years back when Maggie Thatcher declared that industry had to stand on its own feet and the bank started calling in company overdrafts. Starved of working capital, British engineering firms collapsed in droves. William Anderson was one of the vultures who bought up all the redundant plant and machinery. He reconditioned it in his own little factory and sold it on at ridiculous profits to companies all over the developing world. William Anderson was a typical diet and conservative fool. I think a lot of the profits somehow disappeared into offshore accounts. It wouldn't do for a good Tory to pay too many taxes now, would it? Once the bankruptcies began to thin out, William Anderson changed the company's operations. He became an agent for companies wanting to sell machine tools into Europe. Simple, really. The machinery was imported into the country in pieces, then assembled and delivered anywhere in the EEC. Things went well for the company until the two brothers were old enough to join the firm. Unfortunately, William's two sons, who had both been to university, tried to run things on the just-in-time principle. Great for a production line, but it left no time to sort out problems that often arose in our business. Parts coming in from all over the world could be delayed for 1,001 reasons. Luckily, most of our clients were aware of those issues, but if the brothers would just leave a few days' grace when they quoted delivery dates, we wouldn't have half the problems with them that we were having. It always seemed obvious to me. Meddle the customer, they can have it in 3 weeks. Then later tell them you can deliver 5 days earlier. They're happy. Tell them 2 weeks and deliver a week late. They're upset. Never promise what you can't deliver. I couldn't understand why Henry was insisting I'd fly out to Boston. The brothers had negotiated the latest contract with Carter. They should be the ones to fix it. But I knew how it would look to the board if it all went south. I was the scapegoat on this one. When I got back to my office, I called Lisa's office at the Seabrook factory. Yeah, Lisa worked for Carter Sons too. That's what Henry had hinted at. Lisa and I met when she joined the typing pool years ago. Typing pool, it gives you an idea of how long ago I'm talking about. We hit it off pretty well from the start, but it wasn't until the company Christmas party that we got together. You know how it is. Everyone was kissing under the mistletoe. And when I kissed Lisa, well, I'm not sure what happened, but someone finally asked us to move so they could have their turn. Lisa and I didn't discuss it or anything from that kiss. We were an item. I think we both ran around like mad buying each other Christmas presents, and I joined her and her family for Christmas dinner. I think that caused some confusion, as I'm pretty sure they were expecting someone else, but no one said anything. We went out together on New Year's Eve and woke up together in my bed on New Year's Day. That was our first time together. I'm sorry to admit I don't remember much about it. I do remember the night of March 1st, though. Lisa never actually went home to live again, and we were married 4 months later. The next 10 years were the happiest of my life at home. My work life was fine until William's twin boys finished university and joined the firm. Until then, I had been William's right-hand man, his assistant in all things, both above and below board. The boys' arrival changed everything. William wasn't a bad old guy. He didn't put his sons over me in the company hierarchy at first, but they both seemed to resent that. Oh, they were polite enough to me, but I knew they didn't like the influence I had with their father. William Anderson floated the company on the stock market and made a killing. That was the only time he really upset me. I thought he might throw some shares my way, but he didn't. The other thing that didn't happen was I wasn't made a director. Both brothers went on the board, but I didn't. Then William had a heart attack. In the hospital, he asked me to keep an eye on the boys. Fat chance, William, I thought. If you'd given me some shares and put me on the board too, I might have had some influence over them. Of course, I didn't say that to him. It was clear to me he didn't have long left. William retired immediately and passed away 3 months later. The moment the coffin lid was closed, the boys started making changes, none of which I thought were good ideas, but there was little I could do about it. They rented flashy new offices in Seabrook, and most of the admin and sales staff moved there. Henry ran that department while David took over running the factory completely. In doing so, he inherited Lisa as his secretary. She had been the factory manager's PA for some time. But the factory manager didn't stay long because David was always on his case. I wasn't thrilled about Lisa working for David Anderson. It wasn't something I could put my finger on, but I never liked how either of the brothers looked at her. Maybe it was jealousy, or maybe it was just that I didn't like the brothers, but I sensed something. Lisa was 5 years older than the two boys, but she was still a very attractive woman. Lisa seemed to get along very well with David. Too well, if you ask me. No, I didn't think anything inappropriate was going on, but as I didn't like the boys, I sometimes made comments about them. Lisa would spring to their defense, and that was a recipe for trouble. The truth is, as the company got busier and I was rushing all over the place, keeping customers happy and sorting out new contracts, I think David saw more of Lisa than I did. So she was more familiar with his side of any problem before they got dumped on me. Back to the Carter contract and my short-notice flight to the U.S., I called Lisa to give her the good news. I think they probably heard her reaction in the stadium. I know it deafened me, but you're taking me to the play tonight. You promised. Why did you volunteer to go to Boston now? This was another problem. Whenever I was asked to go somewhere, Lisa somehow thought it was something I chose to do. I never understood why she thought I would volunteer for these trips, but it was clear from our discussions that she believed it. I didn't volunteer, Lisa. Henry just ordered me to go. Surely you know what the problem is with the Carter deliveries. Hasn't David told you? There are always problems these days, but why do you always volunteer to fix them, especially when we're supposed to be going to see the play tonight? I'm getting fed up with how you treat me lately. What about my play? See what I mean? I just told her I was being sent to Boston, and she still insisted I de-volunteered. I got angry that she wasn't really listening to what I said. Honestly, Lisa, I don't care about that play. Our jobs are on the line here, and if I can't calm Carter's board down, the company's going to be in trouble with no orders. Don't blame me because your team at the factory can't get the stuff out on time. See, that's the problem with separating the two parts of the company. It had become an us versus them culture. Unfortunately, I was with the us and Lisa was with the them. Another recipe for disaster. Please go home, pack my bag, and meet me at the check-in desk at JFK Airport at 1:15. There was silence on the other end of the phone for several moments, and then in a very controlled voice, Lisa said, "You'll get your bag and maybe a few other things you didn't expect. I'm not your servant, you know." The line went dead. Why did I do that? Why did I shout at Lisa? And why did she shout at me? Damn. I knew I needed to apologize when she met me at the airport, but that didn't happen. I was waiting at check-in at 1:15, but there was no sign of Lisa. 10 minutes came and went with no sign of her. The girl was just about to close the desk when Lisa arrived, strolling through the departure lounge as if I had all the time in the world. "Dan, Lisa, what took you so long?" My tone was sharp as I was worried about missing the flight by then. But then I realized it wasn't Lisa's or my fault we were arguing. It wasn't either of our faults that she was disappointed about the play that evening. And it wasn't good for us to part feeling angry with each other. "I'm sorry, Lisa. I'm just so worked up about this trip." I went to kiss her, but she stepped back. "We don't have time for that. You have to rush off and save your precious contract." Then the girl at the check-in desk said, "You need to check your bag in now, Mr. Carter, or it won't make your flight." I turned back to the girl and went through the formalities. When I turned back to Lisa, she was gone. "How long before the flight's call?" I asked the girl. "Probably about half an hour, but I suggest you don't leave the departure area." I ran in the direction Lisa had come from, but she must have been moving much faster when she left than when she arrived. At the end of the concourse was the entrance to an enclosed bridge leading to the short-term car park. I was halfway across the bridge when, out of the corner of my eye, I caught sight of the bright red sports car exiting the car park below. I could just make out Lisa's coat through the passenger side of the windshield. I knew the troublemaker driving it, though I couldn't see him. David Anderson let no one drive his status symbol other than himself. Boy, was I angry. David Anderson was too busy to go to Boston, but he had time to drive my wife. Christ, I was furious as I made my way back to the terminal building. Unusually for me, I went into the bar and ordered a drink. After sitting there fuming for 25 minutes or so, my flight was called, and I moved into the departure lounge. For most of the flight, I studied the contracts as closely as I could, looking for the loopholes William always built in to give us some leeway on delivery dates and the like. But the boys had been at these latest contracts, and most of those subtle doors had been closed. I was met at O'Hare by, of all people, John Carter himself, along with Diana, his PA, whom he had inherited from his uncle, and a little entourage of yes-men. I'd met John a few times in the past, a bit of a misnomer. Really, John always seemed young next to me. I really only had 5 or so years on him. In the past, Henry Carter had done most of the talking, while John had been one of the minions who enthusiastically nodded at everything Henry said, and of course, laughed at his jokes. I was on guard by John's over-enthusiastic welcome, even more so by the flunkies who carried my bags and laptop to the waiting limo. "We've put you in the company suite at the Metropolitan Hotel," John said. "Henry wanted to see you, but the timing is unfortunate. He's still on his world cruise. He asked me to let you know he'll look you up when the ship docks in Southampton." I remember thinking it was odd for Henry Carter to want to do that. Yeah, I'd always gotten along with the old man, William Anderson, and I had met him many times over the years we had been dealing with his company, but I never thought our friendship was anything more than purely business. Now that he retired, why the hell would he want to see me? The Metropolitan Hotel was always where William Anderson stayed over the years, but when I visited New York on my own, I tended to stay in places a little less extravagant. But John was telling me the suite was the company suite. So I figured it just happened to be vacant. I couldn't see the Anderson brothers forking out on a suite there for me. John, having dropped me off at the Metropolitan Hotel, told me he would send Diana to pick me up for dinner at around 6 o'clock. Then he and his entourage left at around 6 o'clock. Jesus, this trip was getting more confusing by the minute. In theory, I should be taking John Carter to dinner, or at least asking him to join me. It was about 3 o'clock p.m. local time by then. I wondered if Lisa had gone to the play on her own or not. After all, she had the tickets. I called our home number. As I half expected, there was no answer. Thinking it would be about 8 o'clock p.m. in London, I sent a text asking if she was enjoying the play and who she was supposed to go with. When Diana arrived to collect me, she found me on the phone again. I hadn't received a reply to my text to Lisa, and I thought she should have been home by then, but there was no answer on the home phone either. This time, I left a message telling her I was going out to dinner and I'd call her the next day. As I was about to leave the room, Diana took my briefcase from me and put it back on the chair I'd picked it up from. "This is purely a social evening tonight, James. John would like you to meet his family. He said it's a pity you didn't bring your wife." "Diana, what's this all about?" I asked once we were in the car. Diana seemed to be thinking about how to reply, and it was a few moments before she answered. "John just thinks, as you two do so much business together, you should get to know each other better. And he wants you to get to know everyone on the board of Carter Industries too." None of this made any sense to me until I came up with the idea that maybe I was being headhunted by Carter Industries. There was no other explanation I could think of for everyone's strange behavior. The meal was outstanding, with a high percentage of Carter's board present, complete with their spouses. Then we moved on to a night spot where some of the party danced. I didn't venture onto the dance floor, feeling the jet lag. I'd been up 5 or so hours longer than the rest of them. However, as the evening wore on, I became more convinced that my headhunting idea was correct. All the board members went out of their way to talk to me and make me feel at home. Diana stuck to me like glue, almost as if she were my PA. You know what I mean. Whenever someone approached me, she would whisper who they were and fill me in on anything I needed to know about them. It was around 2 o'clock a.m. New York time when I got back to my room, 7 o'clock a.m. back home. There were no messages on my mobile, and according to reception, Lisa hadn't left any messages either. I debated calling her but thought it was too early, considering she'd been out late the night before. I was roused from deep sleep at 10 o'clock a.m. by my breakfast noisily arriving, followed by the ever-present Diana. Once again, she seemed to be acting as my PA. "You have a meeting with the full board at 11 o'clock. That shouldn't take long. And then after that, John would like you to join him for a round of golf." "Oh, you do play, don't you?" "Of course you do. I remember you and William playing with Henry. Anyway, you'll fly up to Henry's estate right after the meeting." "Oh, and John wanted to know how much of a hurry you are to return to London." "Well, that really depends on what John and the board have to say about our late deliveries." "Oh, I think they'll be happy with whatever you say. After all, they know and trust you. Now, you'd better get a move on, or you'll be late for the meeting." Diana suddenly seemed flustered, and she was in a hurry to leave the room, or at least get out of my presence for a while. To be honest, I wasn't concentrating too closely on what Diana was saying, as I was impatient to call Lisa. I called her office at the factory, but the switchboard intercepted my call. The girl explained that Lisa wasn't in the office that day. Luckily, as it turned out, the receptionist was a temp and didn't recognize my voice. The silly woman didn't even ask who I was when I asked if she knew why Lisa wasn't in. She said she didn't know. I don't know why, maybe it was a sixth sense, but something made me ask her to put me through to David Anderson. She told me he wasn't in the office either. Totally angry, I called my home number, but again, it wasn't answered. Then I called Lisa's mobile and found it was switched off. David's mobile was switched off too. By then, I was totally upset, so I called Henry Anderson at the Seabrook office. When he came on the line, I demanded to know where David was. I told Henry there was something about the contract I needed David to clarify for me. It struck me that Henry thought for a little longer than necessary before he replied. "Oh, I believe David's gone down to Hampton. He's meeting with the directors of Kingston Enterprises today. I think he said he was taking Lisa along to take notes." You lying troublemaker. That was the contract I closed last week. It's all signed, sealed, and delivered. What kind of nonsense are you trying to feed me? Once again, it was a thought, not a statement. After Henry asked how things were going, I told him I would probably have to stay a couple of days to calm things down. Then, the moment I got off the phone with Henry, I called Kingston Enterprises' secretary in Hampton. As I expected, she confirmed there were no meetings planned between David and her boss that day. In fact, she couldn't recall them ever having met. Diana reappeared and urged me to hurry with my shower and get dressed for the meeting. So I quickly downed the rest of my breakfast and dashed into the shower. We were a little late arriving, but no one seemed to notice. An unbelievable round of introductions began, followed by a tour of the offices. We didn't get into the conference room until almost noon. I have to say that my negotiations were really a farce. Everyone agreed to everything I said, and they seemed more worried about whether I was upset about anything. I gathered that everyone agreed with me that the Anderson brothers were difficult and a complete waste of space. But that wasn't said in words. Convinced by then that they were planning on making me an offer I couldn't refuse, I was surprised when the offer didn't materialize. When the meeting ended, John and I, followed by a couple of other directors, made our way to the roof to board the helicopter. Diana, as usual, joined us. She asked me when I wanted to return to England and organized a flight for later in the day. On the golf course, I called my secretary in Seabrook on my mobile and told her I would be staying on for a few days. Whatever was going on back there, I wanted everyone to believe I was going to be out of the country for a few more days. Diana must have overheard my conversation. "Sorry to be nosy, James, but is something wrong? I've noticed you're on edge every time you call England," she asked in a concerned tone. "I'm not sure, but I think something isn't right. I'm afraid it's personal. We've known each other for a long time. If what I fear is happening, I'd like to catch them in the act." "Oh God, you don't think your wife is?" "I don't know, Diana, but we had an argument before I left, and she hasn't been where I thought she would be when I tried to call her. I can't reach her on the phone either. It might be that she's still mad at me, but there's a man I can't get in touch with either, and someone over there is lying to me. There must be a reason for that." "Oh, I see why you're in a hurry to get back. Look, if anyone from England tries to call you, they'll have them transferred to me. I'm the only one besides John who knows you're on the plane this evening anyway. All John's calls go through me, so we'll stall anyone who tries to get in touch with you. You can call them back on your cell phone, and they'll have no idea where you are." "Thanks, Diana. Now I think I'd better get back to the game." While I was in conversation with Diana, I noticed John start to walk towards us. I moved out of earshot to make my phone calls. What I found confusing was the fact that, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Diana make a little gesture with her hand when she saw John begin to move in our direction. John immediately changed direction and started talking to the other two players. The game was over, and we went into Henry's mansion for a meal where I met Henry's daughter, Olivia. Once again, I thought something was not quite right. I'd known Olivia for years, but she seemed awkward around me that day. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I felt these people knew something I didn't. I began to wonder if I'd made a mistake in telling Diana of my suspicions. We flew back to the company HQ later in the day. Then Diana accompanied me to the airport. She had arranged for someone to collect my gear from the Metropolitan Hotel. The flight back to JFK Airport was uneventful until I landed. A steward met me in the arrivals lounge and told me there was an urgent phone call for me, leading me to a service phone. "James, it's Diana. Everyone was calling for you last night after you left. Your wife called, and I told her you were in conference with John. Then later, both the Johnsons called, but separately, and I gave them the same message. Your wife called again and asked when you'd be returning home. I told her I'd book you on the Thursday evening flight. Was that all right?" "Thanks, Diana. That should be fine. I'll call them from my mobile later and give them the same story. Thanks for your help. Keep in touch, James. They'll let you know if any of them call again." So my loving wife had reappeared and was showing signs of being concerned about where I was. I wondered why she was suddenly so worried about me. I booked myself into the Hilton by the airport and found that Hertz had already delivered the car I ordered from New York. Or rather the company, had an account with Hertz, so it was my simplest choice. But the car was booked to me privately. Not being tired, I took a drive past my house. Lisa's car was in the drive, and the house was in darkness. To be expected, since it was just after 4:00 a.m. From the call box on the corner of our road, I called the house phone. There was no answer, and the answering machine picked up. I called 4 times in a row, and when she didn't answer, I figured it was safe to assume that Lisa wasn't in the house. Leaving the car where it was, I walked down to the house and entered quietly. A quick search of the place proved it was deserted. What to do now? I asked myself. Well, the best idea I could come up with was to sit down and wait for Lisa to return. I made myself a pot of coffee and settled in the lounge. I planned on the coffee keeping me awake, but it didn't. It was the roar of the Lamborghini's exhaust that woke me just before 7:00 a.m. Through the window, I watched Lisa and David get out of the car and walk up to the house. "It won't take me long to shower and change. Go into the kitchen and make some coffee. Will you? I need something to clear my head." It was amazing. Neither of them noticed me sitting in the lounge, even though the door was wide open. I guess some people don't see what they don't expect to see. Lisa ran up the stairs, and David went into the kitchen. I heard him going through the cupboards. Then he came out and called up the stairs to Lisa. "Where do you keep the coffee maker?" "It's on the counter," she called back. "Well, I can't find it," he called up. I heard Lisa come down the stairs. "Oh, you men are useless without a good woman around," she said as she entered the kitchen. "That's funny. It should be on the counter. I don't think I left it in the hall. My God, what are you doing here?" Lisa, not finding the coffee maker in the kitchen, had come into the lounge and finally spotted me. She stood there in a skimpy bra and panties, neither of which, I might add, I'd ever seen before. "Oh, I was just waiting for my faithful wife to return. And now I think I'm going to kick a slimy little troublemaker's teeth in," I said as I got out of my chair. Both David and Lisa seemed glued to the spot in shock. After all, they were both sure I was still in the U.S. Then David came to his senses and tried to make his getaway. Unfortunately for him, we had a rather unusual and complicated night latch on our front door. The lever turns the wrong way. The more he tugged and pulled at it, the more panic-stricken he became. I slammed him against the door and literally beat him. I don't think the troublemaker even knew how to defend himself. Lisa was screaming at me that it wasn't what it looked like and trying to pull me off David. I don't think I knocked him around half as much as I would have liked, to be honest. I'm not a naturally violent person, so when he tried to roll into a ball on the floor, I stopped hitting him. Some people would have taken the opportunity to kick him, but it wasn't something I could bring myself to do. Turning the latch in the correct direction, I opened the door and shoved him outside. Then, without thinking, I grabbed hold of Lisa and pushed her outside too, slamming the door close. I returned to the lounge. but this time I headed for the liquor cabinet. Lisa banged on the door and rang the doorbell for a while. Through the lounge window, I watched David, who had retreated to his car, get out again, carrying a travel blanket, I assumed, to cover Lisa's almost naked body. Lisa called through the letterbox again, saying it wasn't what it looked like, and begging me to let her back in. I was adamant I wasn't going to get into an argument with her, so I ignored her. Some of the neighbors had taken an interest in our little scene by then. I could see them watching from their front doors and gardens. Lisa, I assume, figured I was in the lounge as she changed her target and began banging on one of the lounge windows, still screaming at me to let her in. Unfortunately for her, she must have hit the window a little too hard just as the police arrived. The window pane shattered, and Lisa cut her arm quite badly on the shards. It seemed that only a few moments passed before the paramedics and ambulance arrived. I assumed the police called them. Then I had a policeman knocking on the door. I watched him talk to both Lisa and David before he did so. "Good morning, sir. Would you like to give me your side of this?" he asked. "I caught my wife with someone. Do I need to say more?" "Not really, sir, but the man says you hit him." "I did. Wouldn't you? He was in my house." "You didn't strike your wife?" "No, I didn't. I just helped her through the door so she could be with her boyfriend. I thought I was being quite generous." Another officer who had remained talking to Lisa and David came over, shaking his head at the first officer. He doesn't want to press charges, and the lady says there was no violence towards her. Then he said to me, "That's a nasty cut your wife has on her arm, sir. The medic says she'll need stitches, so they're taking her to the hospital, but she's going to need some clothes. Will you take them down for her?" "Not a chance. That's her problem. Not mine anymore. Let her boyfriend buy her some new ones. He's got plenty of money. Look, you know she needs clothes. She can't walk around like that. She's almost naked. Then she'll have to find someone else to get them for her. Won't she? You can go up and get some if you like. Or maybe her boyfriend wants to come back in for another round." My attention was caught by the Lamborghini driving away following the ambulance. Oh, looks like she decided to do without. "Now, if you'll excuse me, officers, I've got to call the window people and my lawyer." The policemen left after mumbling something about hoping they wouldn't be called back later in the day. I called the window company, and a guy came by within a few minutes to replace the broken glass. He tried to make small talk while he worked, but soon realized I wasn't in a talking mood. My lawyer transferred me to his colleague who handled divorces at their firm. She told me she'd start the process but couldn't do much until we found out who Lisa would be using as her lawyer. It all really depended on how Lisa wanted to play things. I noticed the police drive past several times during the morning while I was stacking all Lisa's clothes and bin liners in the garage. I have to assume there was some kind of coordination between the police and Lisa. They must have informed her that I put her stuff in the garage because around 3:00 p.m., a different police car pulled up outside the house with just a single officer in it this time. He didn't get out. A little later, a van driven by one of the boys from the factory came down the road and backed into my drive. Using the remote, I opened the garage door. It was clear to me what they came for. Lisa, her arm now in a sling, got out of the passenger seat with one of the girls from her office. While the guy and the girl loaded Lisa's things into the van, I heard Lisa trying the service door between the garage and the kitchen. Finding it locked, she came around and rang the front doorbell. James, I need to talk to you. You've got it all wrong. Nothing happened between David and me. James, can you hear me? I know you're in there. Speak to me, James, please. Let's talk this over, please. You're making a terrible mistake. Lisa called through the letterbox. I opened the door, but before she could say anything, I shoved her handbag in her hand and then slammed it closed again. I'd already removed her credit cards and house keys. I watched as Lisa talked to the police officer, who got out of his car. He kept shrugging his shoulders and shaking his head. After a while, and with a resigned look, he pointed to a spot on the ground where I assume he was telling Lisa and her friends to wait. Then he came up and knocked on the door. Your wife wishes to speak to you, sir, and you know you can't keep her out of the marital home, he said when I opened it. Tell her we have nothing to discuss. The house is already on the market. As she decided, it's no longer our marital home. If it was, she would have been in it last night when I got home instead of being with her boyfriend somewhere else, wouldn't she? Tell her to get her lawyer to contact mine. She knows who mine is. The officer went back down the drive where he had a short but very animated discussion with Lisa and her friends. Lisa then apparently collapsed into her friend's arms, who helped her back into the van. Then they drove away. The police officer stood there shaking his head as he watched the garage door slowly close. With a shrug to one of the neighbors who'd been watching the scene, he got back in his car and drove away. An hour or so later, Diana called me. I told her about the day's events, and she said she was sorry. She asked what I intended to do, and I told her I was divorcing Lisa, and of course, I wouldn't be able to work for Carter anymore. Diana told me I had to keep in touch with her, and made me promise to do so. She also mentioned that Henry Carter was going to call on me, and said I had to stay in touch so he could find me. John had told me that once already. I wondered what was so important about this visit from Henry Carter. It was midnight before I got back to the Hilton. There was no way I could sleep in that house again. It contained too many memories. After breakfast the next morning, I called my secretary, Lily, and asked if Henry was around. She told me he wasn't going to be in the office that day and asked me what was going on. Well, I told her straight out. Lily was very upset by the news. I swear she was crying as I told her. She informed me that Henry had told her I would probably be resigning when I returned. She got the impression he had stayed out of the office just to avoid being there when I turned up. I found Henry's absence strange. I would have thought that after I beat up his brother, he would have taken great pleasure in firing me. After all, David is one of the company's directors, and there wasn't any love lost between us. Nothing was making sense. First, my trip to Boston. Henry insisted I go. But when I got there, all of Carter's people seemed surprised I did. Yeah, there were some late deliveries, but they didn't seem too upset about them. Then there was David going after Lisa. Yes, she's a good-looking woman, but David was always seen with some young thing on his arm. Lisa was at least 5 years older than he was and nearly 10 years older than his usual dates. I don't know. They could have fallen in love. They did spend a lot of their working lives together, but I doubted it. I went into the office to collect my personal property. I took the opportunity to wipe the hard drive on both my company computer and the laptop that I carried, but not before copying the contents of the hard drives onto a zip drive. I took my resignation letter that Lily had produced for me to the personnel officer myself. While I stood there and waited, he arranged for my final salary and bonuses to be paid into my bank immediately. The accounts department was a little reluctant at first, until they realized who was resigning. Nearly the entire staff either helped me carry my equipment down to the hire car or came out to wave me goodbye. I left my company car safely locked in the garage of the house. I wanted to make sure I got everything I was owed before I let them have that back. And that was that. I lived in the Hilton for a week or so before I found a flat I liked. The house sold very quickly. It was in a good area, and I priced it for a quick sale. Work? Well, I thought I'd take a few months off and contemplate my next move. To be honest, I was still expecting Carter Industries to make me an offer and didn't want to commit too quickly elsewhere. Lisa? I saw her a couple of times. Both times, we had a blazing row. Correction, both times, I called her a cheating little woman, and she retaliated. Civil discussions between us seemed impossible. I was surprised she didn't move in with David straight away. She didn't move in with him until months after I kicked her out of the house. Whose flat she'd been staying at in the meantime, I don't know. But the guy I hired to wash her said she moved in with David right after our first big argument at the lawyers. They nearly had to call the police to that one. Probably she realized that there was no way we were getting back together at that meeting. Our second battle of words was when we signed the divorce papers. Lisa, looking very strange, was sitting at the table before I entered the room. She was wearing a big winter coat and was sitting rather oddly. My lawyer and I sat opposite her while the details of the settlement were read out. Then Lisa signed the papers. They were placed in front of me, and as I went to sign, Lisa asked, "James, are you really sure you want to do this? There are things you need to." "Did you hear some cheating, lying woman say something, Laura?" I asked my lawyer. Lisa went crazy, calling me all kinds of names, so I quickly signed the forms and left the room without saying another word. As I said before, I didn't want to get into a shouting match with her. A few weeks, maybe a month or so after the divorce was final, Diana called to let me know that Henry Carter was arriving in Southampton that weekend. I arranged to go down and meet him at a hotel in town. After the awkward formalities were over, Henry and his wife chatted with me about their cruise for a while. Once again, I got the feeling that he was up to something. Look, the guy was just a client I'd known for years, but now he was behaving like a long-lost friend. Oh, we went through the condolences on William's death, and he said he was very sorry to hear about what had happened between Lisa and me. Then he said he was really sorry he couldn't have acted sooner, but he had to respect William's wishes. That statement told me he had been beating around the bush. Well, that all ended when Olivia entered the room. She said hi to me, and gave me a hug, and a kiss on the cheek as usual. Then she gave Henry the briefcase she was carrying. Olivia and Henry's wife then left the room before he opened it. "All right, James, let's get down to business. Tell me, what did you think when William floated the company and didn't give you any shares?" he suddenly asked. I really didn't know what to say. Well, it was his company, and he could do what he wanted with his money, I said. But you helped him build it. From what I know of William, I'll bet you went out on a limb for him more than a few times. I didn't answer that. I figured he'd get to the point soon enough. Did you know that William owned a large proportion of Carter Industries through offshore holding companies? And those same companies also hold a good proportion of Carter shares. This was news to me, but I thought I'd better keep my mouth shut and listen to what Henry had to say. "Tell me, what did William say to you when he retired?" "He knew he didn't have long to live. He asked me to try to keep his boys under control, but without being on the board, I had no chance." "Yes, I'm sorry to tell you he did that on purpose. He figured the boys would bankrupt the company within a year or so, and he didn't want your name on the paperwork. He thought they would try to blame you. You know that if a company goes bankrupt through mismanagement, the directors can be banned from holding other directorships, right? Anyway, he figured the boys would bleed the company dry before long. Now these papers here make you the main shareholder of those holding companies. In essence, they belong to you." Henry placed a sheaf of papers on the table. "And these papers here contain the details of all William's numbered bank accounts. I was supposed to hold on to all of this until after Carter Sons went under, but with what the brothers did to you, I think you better have them now. Did you know that under their father's will, the brothers couldn't fire you?" "No." "Ah, I see you didn't. I think they set you and Lisa up so you would resign." He sat back and looked at me. "You know, James, you're a very rich man now. Although all your money is in offshore accounts, you've got to figure out how to get it back into the country legally. I can show you a few tricks. I've got some very inventive accountants." My mind was spinning. Henry just told me that David Anderson had seduced Lisa and ruined my life just to get me out of the firm. But why? "You look angry, James, and I don't blame you. Look, William was never convinced the boys were his. Martha had a habit of having affairs while William was working. He had DNA tests done some years back, and for a while, he figured he was their father, even if they weren't his sons. But he came to believe they knew he wasn't their real father, and he found out they said some very nasty things about him behind his back. William always said you were more like a son to him, so he decided you would have all his money. He figured the boys would wreck the firm. I think he wants them bankrupt and penniless, as I assume you do now too. But what about the staff at Carter Sons? They'll all lose their jobs." "No, Not if some big American company picks up the pieces. Do you understand William's little game now, James? Carter Industries will cancel its contracts with Carter within the next week or so. Then the next day, one or two of the offshore stockholders will dump a load of Carter shares on the London stock market. That should kill the share price. A hint will be made to the right bank directors, and they'll call on the company's loans. Then a consortium will step in and buy what's left of the company from the banks. They'll let you guess who's going to be at the head of that consortium, and will be the main shareholder. But no one will know that part. You, of course. You'll renegotiate the contracts with Carter. In time, perhaps you'll invite me to join you on your board. Then a merger between Carter and Carter will put you on Carter's board too. How does that sound to you, James? I don't understand. Why didn't William just leave the company to me in the first place? And you'd be fighting their challenges to the will for the next 25 years. You were with William almost every day of his working life for the last few years. You know William was a little eccentric. He was sure the family would claim you had undue influence over him. You know they were sure he had some money hidden away abroad somewhere. They've spent a lot of money over the last few years looking for it. That's why William placed it all in my care. Anyone checking on where your money comes from will discover it comes from me. Oh, and since I'm not connected with Carter Industries anymore, they can't accuse us of insider trading. And of course, I've been on that ship for the last 6 months. So here we are. I'm now the joint chairman of Carter Associates. I leave John to run the American branch and keep my eyes on Europe. Both the Anderson brothers were made bankrupt and are banned from being directors of any company for 10 years. Oh, they've tried to set things up a couple of times, but I had people keeping a close eye on them. Surprisingly, David married Lisa. I think he thought Lisa would get her hands on some of the money he suspected was coming my way. But since it came into my possession after Lisa and I divorced, he had no chance. And once they were married, I applied to the court to terminate her alimony. After that, they got nothing from me. The marriage didn't last more than a year. I felt sorry for the twins Lisa had by him. I suppose they must have been spending time at the office after I threw her out, as the guy I had watching her said they rarely met in the evenings. I doubted the man ever paid her any maintenance after he left her. You know these things go through your mind. I wondered how many years David had been involving Lisa over his desk, but she must have fallen pregnant pretty quickly after we separated. I saw her pushing a pram in Seabrook Road just a year after I kicked her out. The last I heard of David, he was living in southern Spain with the drug squad on his case. Southern Spain. Morocco not far for a fast boat, I imagine. That's how David's mind worked. Well, that's why I tipped the drug squad off. As for Henry, apparently, he's driving buses around London. His wife divorced him after she received information about his little flatmate. No prizes for guessing who supplied that information. And of course, Henry has his mother Martha living with him. Do I feel any guilt about Martha losing her income from Carter Sons? Well, the question should really be, did Martha feel any guilt about cheating on William? You do tend to reap what you sow. Lisa. The last I heard, she was living in a council flat in Seabrook. Living off welfare, I imagine. I don't know. Maybe she's seeing someone on the side. Sorry, that was uncalled for. But it's how I feel. Things took off quickly once we got the ball rolling. John and I worked very well together. Well, we'd both been trained by experts. William trained me, and Henry Carter trained John. In the next few years, we swallowed other companies wholesale. Combining the two companies made us a big multinational. John and I have both stepped back a bit now and let the minions do most of the worrying. Henry Carter and his wife settled in England. He's got a nice estate next to mine, his daughter, Olivia, and I kind of hang around together. No, we're not getting married, and have no plans to. We've both been down that road once. Olivia's on the board with John and me, and of course Diana. We're all getting along just fine. Well, Diana, what did you expect? John's wife died in a car accident a few years ago. After a long time, he married Diana. John claims she only married him because she got fed up waiting for me to ask her. So, you might ask, why am I living in this penthouse all by myself? Well, there's something missing in my life, and has been since, you know when. I kind of live day to day. If an opportunity comes up to make a killing on the market, I'll grab it. But there's gotta be more to life than making money. Okay, so now this social worker hands me a letter from Lisa. I read through it quickly, then hit the intercom button on my desk. Janet, can you find out if Lily is in the building and ask her to come up here? ASAP. Yes, sir. I think she's in her office. I saw her earlier, and I haven't seen her leave. Lily was at my door just a few minutes later. When she entered the room, I handed her the letter without saying anything. As she read it, she took in a few deep breaths that told me its contents had made her angry. The vindictive little woman. Did you have any idea? Not the slightest. What are you going to do? Come on, Lily. I have no choice in the matter. Turning my attention to Rachel Brooks, I asked, what hospital is Lisa in? Seabrook General. And what's the prognosis? Do you know? When I was there last evening, they didn't know. She had taken a cocktail of drugs, just about everything she had in the house. They'd pumped her stomach, but they have no idea how long she had been lying there. The doctor told me it would be some time before they have any real idea. And the children? I placed them with an emergency foster mother last night. She'll look after them today. I thought you'd ask me what you wanted to do. Oh, I have to take that note back. If she doesn't make it, the coroner will want to see it. No problem. Run off a copy for me, Lily, and then give the original back to Ms. Brooks here. Janet, get me the general manager of Seabrook Hospital. ASAP. The intercom rang again shortly after. Hello, yes, good. You know who I am then. I've got a question for you. How much is your annual shortfall, and how much do you expect to be short this year? Is it under $4 million? Okay, I've just decided to donate $4 million to your hospital. I know that your annual accounts will have to be audited before you can accept my donation. Well, I'm quite happy to wait for that to happen, but I have a stipulation. A young woman was brought into your hospital last night, Lisa Carter. I'm going to insist that she receives the very best care your hospital can give her. Money is no object. When the audit is complete and you can receive my donation, they'll add a little bonus to make sure the doctors and staff on her case get the very best facilities they can wish for. Oh, I see. Good. She's on her way to your ICU. Please make sure that the best ICU doctors you have are waiting for her when she arrives. Lily and Rachel were staring at me when I finished the call. You're not going to visit her, are you? Lily asked. No, I'm afraid that would be a step too far for me. Ms. Brooks, thank you for coming to see me today. If my wife dies, they'll want to adopt my children. You will be hearing from my lawyer within the next couple of hours. There's nothing else to discuss right now. Lily, walk Ms. Brooks out, please. Thank you, Ms. Brooks. When Lily returned, she found me staring out of the window at the city skyline. What are you thinking? Oh, life. Love. That there's no fool like an old fool. I was wondering where I went wrong with Lisa, how I ended up here all by myself. That there's gotta be more to life than making money. I should go and see her, you know. James, listen to me. You're not the fool here. Lisa is. If you go and see her now, you'll be undoing all the good work you've done over the last few years. Hell, you know, she's probably only done this to get you to go running to her side. She always could twist you around her little finger. You've done the best you can for her by calling the hospital and ensuring she receives the best care. Go and see her now, and you'll be caught up in her web all over again. No, James, she made her bed, and now she's lying in it. If you still want my opinion, I suggest you let her get on with it. Then what should I do? Go and see your daughter. Call Henry and Olivia. Get them to meet you down there. You know you should. You've been putting it off too long. It's her birthday next month. Do it for her. Janet, can you arrange for my car to pick me up in 10 minutes? Yes, it's a trip to Southampton. I've got some groveling to do. That's more like it. James, you know you've made the right choice. They'll deal with things here. So that was it. I was in the car and on my way down to Southampton within minutes. It was a long drive, but I felt much better knowing I was going to see my daughter. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.